One of the objectives of this painting was to kind of have a light source coming from the point of view. So where you're viewing the paint. So the light source is from the perspective that you're seeing into the painting.
Almost no shadow.
In a sense, I think this has a lot to do with the way we see like attention as a kind of light source. And so it both feels natural, although rarely encountered, like unless you have a headlamp on your head, right? But there's something significant about it, I think, because it resembles a way we attend to objects in the world.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Blue Hour Podcast, where we explore the minds and the worlds of visionary artists and creators. For this week's intro, I thought I would do something a bit different. I want to explain and give you a bit more insight into how I program my business and everything that Rosenbra stands for. It is, for me, very important to address the lunar cycle, this kind of monthly cycle that we go through 13 times per year, but that seems to have less importance than in ancient times, as now we are tracking more of the solar calendar, which gives us the insights of the ebb and flow throughout the year and the seasons of going within and then going without in the summertime. The lunar calendar is a bit different, as it helps us to track the unconscious movements within ourselves, how our emotions ebb and flow in a more subtle way, the subtle energies, how they move. And connecting with these cycles help us understand the more subtle energies that we're faced through on the day-to-day. Emotions, these intangible aspects of life. So this is why I publish these podcasts on the new moon and on the full moon. And a good way to start working with this energy is by planting a seed on the new moon and then seeing it grow, keeping this intention in our minds daily until the full moon and kind of symbolically releasing it. And what happens, the moon is a metaphor for the mind, for like your awareness. So the new moon, like it's almost like you plant a seed, you cannot see it yet, it's under the earth. It grows until the full moon, and on the full moon you start seeing in your life the effects of that intention. And you can start tracking how your mind works in collaboration with your emotions, which project energy, and over time you just become more self-aware. You have a better relationship with you get a feedback from life and start understanding life in a more self-aware way. So yeah, I think it's important to bring back this kind of science, the science of the moon, the more feminine qualities of our existence. And so today's episode is with Matt Cangiano, and we filmed in the gallery space where we had a show together, a collective show, which is about the night and very connected with the moon, what's inside, what's passive. And so we had a very interesting philosophical conversation about these themes, about what forces him, what comes through in his work. And I think you're gonna really enjoy his mind. He has a very philosophical mind, and his interests are pretty vast, so he has a lot of different perspectives on it. So yeah, I think let's jump right in. So thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
This very special location. This is actually we're having a show tonight. This is the opening, so we got lucky that we can actually film in this space. We have your art in the background, art on my side. So yeah, thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
Maybe for people that don't know your work, can start just maybe describing like what it is that you do and maybe one of your inspirations for your recent work.
Sure. I think in the broadest terms, I work in traditional mediums, drawing and oil painting. In the past, there was a very distinct divide between the impulse that gave rise to the drawings and the impulse that gave rise to the paintings. in some sense, the drawings are kind of about exploring an inner world, and the paintings are about externality, about observing the outer world. With this painting, actually, it's kind of a significant painting for me because those distinct impulses are starting to come together into a kind of aggregate of both those impulses. We can talk about more about the specifics of each of those impulses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I see also you had mentioned it yesterday or a few days ago about like pipes and stuff like that are very symbolic in your work.
This is a somewhat recent occurrence. I think within the last year, the pipe started showing up in my dreams. I started realizing that it was in my art. Culverts, like rainwater spouts. Those have been like a prominent object in my work. I see them in a sense kind of as portals. They lead somewhere. In practical terms, they lead to infrastructure that's underground. And I think there's a deep symbolic resonance with that. So what I didn't realize about this show was that both the drawing and the painting feature pipes or cylinders that are going through thorns. And I didn't realize that until Alex, in the studio visit we had for the show, she actually noticed that. I didn't even notice it. I realized that they both had cylinders, but a very specific.
Yeah, like if you were to go in that portal behind you, you would have to go through the thorns to like actually jump into it.
Yeah, and it or it gives you a kind of way through the thorns without having to encounter them. It kind of can insulate you against them. So I'm not sure what that means.
Well, I know there's a lot of symbols, even with the famous Mario world that goes through pipes.
Oh yeah,
with dimensions. Like in the Nintendo 64 video game of Mario, when he jumps into portals, you have this kind of open space, and then you jump to like paintings, and then Mario opens up. I don't know if you remember that.
I never played video games too much, but I do recall that. And sometimes they were even bent like this one too, right?
Yeah. So the pipes would actually be
portals.
All of their video games that feature Mario and Luigi and whatever. But there's a specific one that's Nintendo 64 where there's a lot of like occult symbolism in the video game.
Interesting.
Like when you go to, it's basically the lobby of the video game, and then you have like the levels or like paintings you jump into.
Yeah.
So you go in the lobby and you find all these paintings, and then you start a new level.
Interesting.
All the tile work is like black and white, like a Freemason, like a ritual room.
This is also something that shows up in my drawings is tiled floors.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Like black and white tiles.
Yeah.
Yeah, the symbol of basically like the physical dimension with its polarities.
Sure.
Of night and day, which is the thing that we're exploring now. We're lit up in the back, the dark background.
Yeah.
I guess this is the theme of the show too, right? Like.
Yeah.
We've lit up a few of those portals almost.
Yeah.
The show.
Yeah.
For the spectators with their eyes to jump into. Because I'm excited to see how people will resonate. Because it's one thing to have this type of lit up environment, but with our specific artwork that was curated that does talk about these kind of spiritual, almost like like it seems like there's a spiritual dimension to a lot of our works here.
It's interesting how much resonance is occurring between the artists here. And then also like I started this painting a couple months ago before I knew the show was like happening, and one of the objectives of this painting was to kind of have a light source coming from the point of view. So where you're viewing the painting. So the light source is from the perspective that you're seeing into the painting.
Almost no shadows.
Exactly.
Because you're seeing it
It's
as like...
In a sense, I think this has a lot to do with the way we see like attention as a kind of light source. And so it both feels natural, although rarely encountered, like unless you have a headlamp on your head, right? But there's something significant about it, I think, because it resembles a way we attend to objects in the world.
It makes me think also like the pine cone, the pineal gland, actually like scientifically has been proven to emit photons when it's active.
Oh, interesting.
It creates light literally. So enlightenment is not just metaphorical.
Interesting.
It's actually an enlightenment that happens in your brain that lights up. And that would be kind of the headlamp that projects into the world.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like spiritual vision. Most of us on earth, like our lamp is off for most of our lives.
Early theories of vision had the idea that our eyes like went out to meet objects rather than the light coming into them.
Yeah, there is some a lot of old ways of thinking of this, but I think now it's been reversed. Like the light comes from the sun and comes to us instead of us lighting the world. I don't know.
Yeah.
There was a switch at some point in history, I think.
Yeah.
But you said you were interested in McLuhan, like this.
McLuhan is one of my interests for sure. I think irrelevant here. I think more than anything, McLuhan acknowledges the fact, or kind of, he pays attention to how the sense organs affect our consciousness. So they're not merely just another way of getting more information out of the world, but they strongly inform the way we experience the world, the concepts we can make. Yeah, so you have unique qualities that are associated with the eye, like the eyeball, and how that affects our experience, the way we act in the world. The ear, it's more 360. You get different concepts and experiences of the world with that as well.
Different ranges, I guess. Like that's what in the little text that we had to write on the 4-question one was about the sensorialities. And basically, like, we receive vibrations, right? Like light vibrations, sound vibrations, and different forms of vibration.
Yeah.
And they all kind of correspond to a different wave, so that we can receive different types of waves from our environment, basically.
And I think what's important is those are different in kind. Like, the qualities of the ear are very 360. The conception of yourself based off of your ear is different than the conception of yourself based off of your eye. The eye centers you in a distinct position. It's more conducive to individualism, where the ear is more communal, less distinct. An interesting thing too is you can't close your ears, as you can close your eyes.
Does McLuhan talk about that, or is that?
Yeah, totally. And then another thinker that's been really influential on me, who speaks about these in perhaps a more esoteric way, is Jean Gebser.
Okay.
And so Jean Gebser has a kind of model where consciousness itself has evolved through the epochs, and he associates different sense organs with different stages of consciousness.
Oh, and what would be the most recent one?
So basically, this age is the kind of mental rational age, which he associates with the eyeball. Okay. You get perspective, you get distinct quantities. It's very intellectual, and he sees a move towards the integral, which is the integral, which is a kind of seeing through all the previous stages and integrating them. So not even synthesizing them, but allowing them to shine through each other.
Interesting.
It's very.
Which faculty is this linked to?
So that would be, I guess, like a kind of omni-sensory or beyond sensory kind of.
It feels like like in the occult sciences, they do have, they talk about the five senses, but like there are so many other senses. For example, our heart emits a magnetic field.
Mm-hmm.
You can like measure it. And this is a form of sense, like you can sense a lot further, and a lot of things, especially linked to kind of attraction with other humans, or kind of inner knowings that are like linked with intuition, are connected with this sense. And then some studies showed, I don't think it's proven as a fact, but like primitive man, like 20,000 years ago or something, when they had to migrate from like the main continent in Africa and towards here in North America, there would have been this little slit of land in between the continents, in between ice ages, and they would have navigated there through this kind of sense that was more developed back then with the magnetic field of the earth. So
yeah,
it's like a sense that is kind of forgotten.
There's theories that animals function like this as well. Yeah.
Well, I guess that's how like you get insights into like what is latent in us, what is potential. You just look at nature.
It's also possible that space, like extension, isn't homogeneous, and there's unique qualities inherent in space. Not outer space, but just like extension itself. And we could perhaps navigate via that. Take, for instance, the difference between left and right. This is, you cannot describe this difference. You actually just know it. Left has all the same descriptors as right. And yet we can differentiate between the two. To me, this hints at the idea that, perhaps there are differences that escape descriptors or qualities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the more like subjective qualities. Is that what would you say that?
Maybe not exactly like that. There's identities which don't have describable qualities, and yet we can encounter their difference and discern them.
Okay, so in this sense, they would be objective, as like many people would have the same type of like
just like left and right.
Yeah,
are I think that for me they're objective differences.
But there is also this thing in the yogic traditions. They do talk about the Ida and the Pingala, which are the left and right side of our spine, that have nerves that kind of cross each other along the spine all the way to the third eye. There's a middle pillar in between, like the staff of Candice action that's painted on top of there.
Yeah.
And this is kind of the left and the right that intertwine, but in different chakras, where these nerves meet and they create a bundle of energy.
Yeah.
And so these kind of reversal of the left and right happens there. And then on a bigger scale, they're kind of like the masculine and the feminine polarities within us that is manifested into femininity and masculinity.
Yeah.
And genders, negative pole, positive pole, and how they kind of merge together. So I'm curious, like, just because you were talking about that, if at some point this left and right could like reverse, how?
I mean, that's an interesting question. I think what I was speaking about is the fact that like you could have a left-handed glove, right? Mm-hmm. And it's not relative. It won't fit on a right hand. There's something unique about the quality of left. Mm. But, here's a thought experiment. There's an alien civilization. We make contact with them and we try to figure out if we ask them, oh, what side is your heart on? But they don't have the same nomenclature for left and right.
Yeah.
And there'd be no way to tell if our heart was on the same side.
Well,
there's no reference.
What would they could just point to it, like,
let's say this is just by description, just by voice.
Okay. Yeah. I mean,
Is this something I think about a lot? It could seem kind of pedantic, but I think it relates to another theme in my work, is like identity and its particularity. It's unique. Particularity is a theme that really is something I think about a lot.
and is this something like you study in the outer world, and like, how does that manifest in your work, for example?
I think with observational work, where I'm doing direct observation, especially from life,
Mm-hmm.
you're really paying attention to particularities. Every object is unequivocal. And I think for me, observational art develops a sensitivity to this. And in a way, at least experientially, this is like a life force of the world. Every experience is unique. It can never be repeated. And to me, there's a lot of vitality in that. And it is one of the magnets that engages me with the world.
Okay. Yeah, like even in this painting, I can imagine, like, I know you kind of did part of it by memory or something, like, or it was not all on the spot.
So this painting kind of marks a transition where in recent years, it's one of the first paintings that is not based off of direct observation or pure observation. So this scene doesn't exist in the external world.
Mm.
Although I did encounter the pipe going through the rose bush, and the rest of the image kind of unfolded autonomously in that encounter.
Yeah, because it does, because also you said that the light almost comes from the viewer, how it's projected onto the scene. So it's easy to project, like, I can see myself, like, take the frame off and, like, I'm there and I'm observing this and having a moment with, like, just observing the qualities of light, of, like, movement, like.
Yeah, with this kind of lighting configuration, I feel like the viewer becomes kind of the subject of the painting. The painting's kind of pointing at you, saying, the light's coming from you.
Imagine the pipe was just,
turned,
and then you see kind of the inside, and then it's like,
yeah,
it invites you even more to go, like, travel down, like a little Mario.
This right underneath, there's a blackness that I kind of saw starting to. It's subtle, but it kind of spirals. So I kind of influence a bush as a spiral.
Oh, okay. Like in the way you kind of painted it?
Yeah. Yeah, I kind of reconfigured the leaves so that they spiral in, because I felt that, you feel this pull towards the pipe in that painting.
Interesting. Yeah, I think it's interesting to see your work, and I can see, like, a lot of similarities in our work. And
definitely.
in how we kind of perceive things and movement, and even the art, it reminds me, I was saying that because, like, it reminds me of my first photographic work, where I would just kind of leave home at, like, midnight, like in the countryside, just drive or go on my bike with a camera, and then just see, like, the things that are lit up in the countryside, like someone has a lamp on his barn that just lights this tree, and just sitting there alone and just contemplating it with music, taking a picture, and just kind of staying there for an hour, just watching the stillness of the night. Kind of reminds me of this energy of contemplation.
There's something so seductive about this singular light source illuminating something in the dark.
Yeah.
I see in your work a kind of self-luminescence. Like, for example, the architecture in this space, it seems like it's emitting light itself. That's something I also find happens in my paintings. I have have a fascination and a deep resonance with rocks. And the way I paint them, they kind of end up emitting their own kind of light.
Yeah, I can see also, because I saw your chart yesterday, I forget.
Yeah.
Virgo rising is all about kind of this connection with nature.
Yeah.
So I can see how nature must be a very deep source of inspiration, like for your work. I can see it clearly there. But yeah, I remember the first painting I have ever done. I was very naive. Like I didn't feel like I knew myself much, and it was more like a kind of a impulse to create something, just using stuff I find in aesthetic and putting it together. Until later on, I kind of looked back on it to study it. But my first painting was just a big building in like a rectangular like shaped canvas. And the whole idea was to have the grass have like spots of light coming from the grass. The trees, some trees are lit up, but through like the chlorophyll and the
interesting.
the leaves. Like that's what I was imagining. Because like it almost feels like nature has like passive light stored in it, right? Because it receives the light, it kind of absorbs it like these energy, what do you call it? Energy panels, the solar panels.
Yeah.
It absorbs the light, and there's some transformation, but they store it almost in the chlorophyll of it.
I think this feels true in experience. And I think this is something painting can do that maybe photography can't. It can capture this. This goes beyond just the retinal experience. This is a more living experience of the way. Yeah. And I mean, I'm interested in also like actual subsurface scattering. So leaves are such a beautiful item because the light gets trapped in them, bounces around, and then they actually do emit their own photons. Yeah. And skin is such a amazing example of subsurface scattering. Although it's something I haven't really painted.
How would you describe subsurface scattering?
The light enters so the surface is kind of translucent. It enters into the surface, bounces around, and then so it's not reflecting, it's emitting out of
a soft box.
Yeah.
There's one source, but then it kind of deflects it into a bigger kind of area than actually the source of the light.
Or like when you put the flashlight in your hand and you can see, it's
interesting.
It's when light doesn't reflect off the surface, but it goes into it and then it re-emits out of it.
So that's something you're like studying in your work.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful property of oil paint. Oil paint has such a capacity. I mean, it does subsurface scatter, and this can be enhanced through glazing, different transparencies of paint, like all the lake pigments and stuff like that. So oil paint is such a beautiful material in itself. And that's, probably the other half of my interest in painting is the paint itself. There's something deeply profound about it. It's, again, you can't reproduce. It's imminently unique. A brushstroke can never be reproduced, and it can never be fully controlled. And that's fascinating to me.
It reminds me of what you told me last time. This kind of it feels like it's connected in the way like of an kind of experimenting with, I don't know, philosophical truth. Like when you created this little sculpture and you said like you wanted to see how you would feel like if you buried it and it was kind of like not to be shown.
Yeah.
Like maybe talk about that a little bit. I think that's very interesting. Like,
yeah, for me, I think all art is connected to experimentation. I think in a sense that's why we do it, is that we learn something through it. It's actually not a representation, but a presentation. So it doesn't go, and even if it does go from a formed idea into instantiation, there's going to be something happens there. Something has to happen there through the kind of unique particularities of matter. So that runs throughout my whole work. This more specific experiment you're talking about was this question of like, who are you making art for? Would you make art if there was no one to see it? And so rather than just speculating about this question from a kind of safe intellectual space, I made these wooden sculptures, small wooden sculptures that I carved and painted. And then I buried near herbs that I have a particular resonance with. And the idea was, no one's going to see these.
Mm-hmm.
And how would that feel? It was an interesting experience. And I can't really articulate what came out of it, but it felt liberating.
Mm-hmm. Well, you never know, right? Like maybe in the 10 years, you're going to be like, this could be like the coolest project if I go back and dig them.
Totally.
And then it actually ends up becoming a statement on something.
This relates to another experimentation that I underwent. So I was reading a lot of philosophy, mainly Henry Bergson, he has this idea of the virtual. And the virtual it's real. He describes it as real, but not actual. So the realm of time, of ideas, these in a sense are real, but they're not physically actual. And I could reiterate this, I could kind of glimpse it through understanding, but I wanted to create a more concrete way of experiencing it. So I developed this meditation practice called the image form meditation. It takes place over 7 days. This is similar to the burying the sculptures, but it has a little bit different. It comes at it from a different side. So I'll give you a description of the meditation. Mm-hmm. It takes place over 7 days. On the first day, you come up with a kind of a shape and you meditate on it. Let's say a triangle. It could be anything. Triangle. On the second day, you could add another element to that shape. So perhaps you enclose the triangle into a circle. Mm-hmm. And then you meditate on the triangle in the circle. And then you proceed with this meditation for 7 days, and you'll have this kind of complicated 7-layered shape. Perhaps it looks like a mandala, perhaps it could look like whatever you want.
Can the lines overlap or not?
They can do whatever you want. The main focus is that there's 7 distinct elements that get cumulatively added to each other over the course of 7 days. At the end of the process, you'll have a actually quite complicated mental object. And from here on, the aim is to kind of try to sustain this object. After the 7 days, you'll have this complicated mental object. And the aim from here on out is to try and sustain this object mentally. And one of the criteria of the meditations, and it's absolutely important, is that you don't articulate it physically in any sense. So you can't speak about it, you can't draw it, you can't even gesture it. So it exists on a purely non-material realm, completely mentally. And so I did this practice about 4 years ago. I created 2 image forms, 2 7-layered shapes, and I've been maintaining them ever since. So I'll usually informally, but sometimes I'll actually sit down and reconstitute it or tend to it, kind of like a garden, it almost feels like, and sustain it so it doesn't dissipate into non-memory. And this is an interesting experience because no one else knows what these shapes are. They gain kind of solidity and definition in your own experience, but also you don't know if they've changed or not because you have no reference point. So perhaps, and this is something this is an interesting question that you, rather than pondering, you actually experience.
But like the drawing cannot see it after.
You never draw it. You do this all mentally.
Okay.
So the whole point is that this whole process is completely non-material.
And I'm wondering, like, what opened up within you with these shapes?
I think an experience in experience, not just theory, the reality of non-material, the realities, it becomes apparent because you actually have these complex shapes within you. They have a kind of solidity and they have no physical substrate.
So it's more an experiment to start understanding how to use your mind. Because I feel like these types of symbols or whatever can be activated through using your mind. And often we don't, it's like such subtle energy, like mental energy.
Yeah.
That the material world we live in, it's so far away. We have difficulty understanding the emotional layers of our humanness. So
they're very reality on their own. For me, we move so habitually from idea to instantiation or articulation. So I have an idea, I draw it down, I make it. I have an idea, I have to say it to someone. I have an experience, I have to say it for it to be real. And because of this habitual flow from idea to form, to physical form, we forget that the idea is real. So with this project, with this meditation, I wanted to cut off that habitual flow so that we can actually remain in this ideational reality.
Okay.
And you can experience that. In a sense, it's a kind of gateway meditation for more skeptical people. It doesn't ask you to believe in anything. It's just an experience, and it reveals some kind of reality we're not usually exposed to.
Yeah. I mean, from my study of also the occult sciences, it's like, the first few years of your studying, basically, if you're in an order or in some sort of, I don't know how to call it, like lodge or whatever, the first sequence of time you're in there is basically just training your mind to be able to be still with mental images,
Totally.
mental symbolism, because it opens up the dimension of the mental world, which connects us to the spiritual world. That's the one right before. So that's why I was wondering what opens up for you, because it feels like you're actually creating a mandala that's specific for your identity.
Yeah.
Perhaps it helps you connect to your truer identity, which is not just your physical body, it's your mental body that's more refined.
So I started this meditation, like, I think around 4 years ago. And back then I definitely had a different relationship to spirituality. I was perhaps a lot more skeptical. And so I don't know if you could attribute it just to that meditation, but it seems like a turning point. Another thing that's, I think, kind of interesting about it is that, in your kind of more traditional and common, like Vipassana meditation, mindfulness meditation, it's kind of about deconstructing an identity, or it can be framed that way. This goes almost the other way. It solidifies, in a sense, an identity, but one that's maybe not so egoic.
But it feels like Vipassana is to bring you to this, because you're deconstructing, like Vipassana specifically is almost like stored memories in your body, stored emotions, and that's why you scan and you have different things that are released that are painful or good, and then you just observe them so that you don't create more karmas. And then in a way that helps you like be more present, because often we're in the prison of our own emotions, in the prison of our own physicality. And then when we kind of can release this aspect of ourselves that keeps us hostage, then we can rise up and be more connected to other dimensions. Mental dimension being one that is, I think, intentionally or unintentionally being programmed, like through TV series we watch and like all of these things that bring no value except entertainment and like a surrender. You just sit up on your couch and then you're being fed stuff, but you're not really present with it.
Yeah.
And often, like, then you go on your daily life and this program continues running,
Yeah.
and it's unconscious. And so like once you kind of can take off these layers and remain into this mental sphere, then all of a sudden you get more clarity of all those programs, all those symbolism that exist, the realm of ideas, all those ideas that are there through symbols in your mind that actually dictate your reality. And you can start to like reverse it.
Yeah.
So I think they're not opposite like Vipassana and this. I feel like Vipassana is just kind of a fast tracking the process to get there. That's my idea of it.
I think what I was kind of focusing on was that because, and I mean, it's up for question whether other people or other beings have access to these forms you create. But from a certain perspective, you are the individual form, or you're the individual subjectivity that has access to this. And that can kind of be solidifying rather than disseminating. I agree with also the similarities. It just, perhaps when you go in opposite directions, you come around to a similar place.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I think that you're absolutely right. Like you can go through nature through these portals and then you get up on the other side the same way you can go up and go.
Yeah.
I do think that there's different traditions with different techniques that bring you
totally
to the same places. But so since there, where has this led? Like what's in your mind these days? Like after doing all these experiments a few years ago, what's your current understanding of mentality or even spirituality?
For me, and this is something I've realized recently, is that openness, a kind of ineffability and uncertainty, is really where I truly stand. I've found over the past year what I thought was a true spiritual impulse was more of a clinging to a system for a fear that maybe of a lack of meaning or something like that, like a trying to insulate myself against nihilism. And part of, not overcoming for good, but a step in overcoming that was realizing that the way I truly relate to these things is through openness, uncertainty. And I think, in a sense, the spiritual truths are ineffable.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think that's exactly how I want to do it. As soon as you say I know, like, and you kind of it's kind of a clinging, right? Like you read something and then you cling to this belief. Sometimes it can be, from what I've learned, like these things can be almost like you read something or you from one philosophy, one tradition, and then it becomes almost like you look in the horizon and you see this place and it kind of brings you there. But the most important is to know that that's not the final destination. Like this is just one location in space-time, but there's like a lot more, and then you can go find another one. Otherwise you get stuck in,
totally,
you don't evolve.
And the main danger is you close yourself off to certain other possibilities. You can numb yourself to possibilities. I'm very interested in visionaries of all sorts, but something I find interesting is most of them are certain what they experience, and a lot of them experience different things. There is convergence, but there's also divergence. How
was I reading recently? Like Symbolism. Oh yeah, it's a book on symbolism. I was in Amsterdam a few weeks ago, and I went into like the biggest occult library. I don't know if it's the biggest in Europe, but the biggest in Amsterdam. And then they just gave me access to the library. I went there and just picked a few books, and there was one on symbolism. And basically, like symbolism, we think of the archetypes, which is the overarching symbols that different traditions will tap into. But like every mystic, philosopher, human for that, like can dream of the same archetype with a different symbol. Like it will come up as something different depending on their culture and where they were brought up. And I think Carl Jung was also very, did a deep research of that.
Totally.
And a story that comes up, he said his first encounter to this truth is that he was seeing some woman that came to him for help because she was having very vivid nightmares that like were very disruptive of her life. And so he had to understand what these nightmares meant. And then she came up with all these weird figures that kind of were very disconnected. Like she was dreaming basically of like divas and stuff from the East, but she was living in America or in Europe. And so he went back in time and then he figured out that actually her mom birthed her in like India or somewhere in the East. And she went there for a few days and then she came back, but she was actually born there. And just because she was born there, she inherited like the collective unconscious.
Interesting.
And her dreams were tinted with the culture from there.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, so because also I work with symbolism with artists and with my own work, that was a big insight to not kind of like categorize symbolism.
Exactly.
Because one symbol can have different meanings for different cultures.
And Jung's great on this, right? What he says a symbol is something that cannot be reduced. Like the symbol always exceeds itself. It's not capturable. This comes back to this like distinction between left and right. It's not a capturable distinction by attributes. And it also relates to something we talked about earlier, is that, you know, you have these kind of ideal objects, and when they instantiate, something happens, and particularity and difference is a part of that.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And so like in your work, you have the symbolism, a lot of pipes. Is there other symbols that come back?
Yes. I could just talk about my drawing a little bit and how it unfolds. So I recently kind of came up with this way of describing the drawing, is that it's, you know, to bring it back to Carl Jung. Carl Jung had this idea of active imagination. And in a sense, the drawings feel like a kind of external active imagination. So I start with perhaps an impulse or a direction, and I start with a ruler, and the ruler kind of unfolds its own logic of ratio, and then forms start to grow out of that. Symbols arise in the drawing. And I mean, this is not particular to me. I think a lot of artists experience this. Symbols arise in the drawing, and I kind of interact with them and follow their logic, which might be revealed to me much later. And so there's a kind of mystery in the process, which often induces a lot of synchronicities as well. Well, I'm
so funny, like this series that I did in 2017, and it's the same thing. Like,
yeah,
I program my mind by painting them, and then still to this day, I feel like I've lived through the 6 first paintings, like they happened in my life through the symbols opened up into events in my life.
Yeah.
There's still the 7th one, the most mysterious painting I did in this series.
Interesting.
That has not fully yet, like run its course.
Yeah.
But like, that's so funny that you also had this insight. And this, what I just told you about my art, allowed me to understand also that a lot of artists, especially when you start making art, were actually unconsciously manifesting some mirrors that will help our psyche heal from traumas and different things that are keeping us in the past. So the first artworks that most of us do is actually that. Like, if you couldn't know this fact and actually start studying your paintings, your sculptures, your whatever comes to you, you could learn a lot about like what parts of you are still trying to heal. And then until like you become aware of that, and then like you can like receive even bigger truth about yourself and about, you know, reality through your paintings and your drawings. That for me, that when I started to analyze my friends' art and stuff, like, okay,
yeah,
so much going on.
There's something so I think, unique about art in its ability to be about the past, but always have a kind of openness to the future, a kind of teleological pull.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, that's why I do this podcast with visionary artists, you know?
It's
like
sorry.
The vision is of the future. You channel something that informs something of the future, and hopefully not just your future, but the collective future.
There's an interesting thinker right now who I'm interested in, this kind of gateway for people who are less inclined to spiritual realities, and how they can be opened up, because I'm in part very skeptical.
Yeah.
There's this thinker named Eric Wargo. He wrote a fascinating book called Time Loops, and it's all about precognition, but he comes at it from a very materialistic, scientific point of view, but through, the vast amount of anecdotal evidence. He basically gives a very good case that you can't deny that precognition happens a lot of times in dreams, but also in his new book, it's specifically about art and how it relates to the future, and how it relates. This is more so on an individualistic pole, but how you can see the future events reflected in artists' work.
Yeah, that's so true. Do you know Israel Regardie?
I know who he is. I started reading a little bit of his book on Kabbalah, but I didn't get
because
through.
he has. For me, there's Manny P. Hall. There's a few authors that I really like that actually have a more analytical, rational. Alice Bailey, that we talked about a little bit.
Yeah.
About spirituality, because spirituality for me, like, of course, because people don't understand it, they kind of categorize it as like, something I cannot even open up, because it's too, it's either doesn't exist, or it would take so much for me to like dive in and actually try and understand, because it's abstract.
I think also sometimes people feel attached to their model that doesn't allow for that, and it can feel threatening.
Yeah. And certain authors, like I mentioned, it feels like they're bringing it into a more rational realm, because spirituality is everything. Materiality is spirituality. Emotionality is spirituality. It's vibration on different degrees. And so spirituality in 200 years will probably be what for now is like magic. Like the science of the future. What I mean is, the science of the future will be the spirituality of today.
Mm-hmm.
It's just very, like, we'll develop tools that can like start take like dark energy and these kind of quantum fields even more, and start understanding how it's all connected to magnetic fields and stuff like that.
But do you think that it's quantifiable or no?
Spirituality?
Yeah.
I think there are some, what the material part of it is. And what I mean by that is, like, dark energy, I think, can be like in the future, but there's always a subjective part to everything, as there is for nature and like the material world.
Yeah.
There's a subjective part to all the layers of consciousness, I believe.
Me too. And I one thing I'm quite firm on is that I don't think quality can be exhausted by quantity. And so that's the one kind of danger of it becoming, depends on how you define science, but reducing everything to our ability to quantify and control it. I think there's something deeper and more ineffable.
Yeah.
Possibly.
Yeah. It's like, even your drawing, like, it reminds me of a spinal cord.
Yeah.
Which is where all those dimensions, exist. Like, it's actually along your nervous system. Like in the yogic traditions, it's been long studied.
Yeah.
And peer-reviewed subjectively, like how they train yogis to do the same things and they have the same results. It's just not like in a laboratory, like in a university or a thing, but although it is starting to be studied in this way, but like the ascension of consciousness exists within you, like literally physically, but also in all the dimensions open up as it goes through the physicality of you.
Yeah.
So like this kind of
one thing I was thinking about a lot while working on this drawing was the significance of us standing, of the human being this kind of vertical being.
Yeah.
And I think concretely, like this can be explored just by, sitting up very straight and how that affects your consciousness.
That's interesting. Yeah, what I like about everything you said is it just feels like you're just a very curious individual, and you're not kind of it doesn't feel like you need to like grip onto something. You just want to explore, and like you find something that you're curious about, you're interested, and you actually do the work of like going through with it. Not just like, oh, I might try it one day, but like with the symbols and stuff.
Yeah.
You're getting your own evidence through this instead of reading it, and like I find it very interesting and inspiring.
The mystic Rudolf Steiner, he wrote a very, very, probably one of the most esoteric books I've ever read on color theory, as informed by Goethe had this interesting approach to color theory, which it was in contrast to Newton's idea that, color was just frequencies of light waves. Goethe was like, but that doesn't really tell us about like the quality, like the actual experience of color. So he develops his own color theory. And then Steiner was very influenced by Goethe. And he writes a book on color theory. But one interesting thing, this book is I don't think I can recommend it because it's so strange. But one thing he said, perhaps it would be interesting to check out but one thing he says in that book, which I think is really hit home for me, is that color symbolism is a thing that can block us from the true esoteric experience of color. So the idea that red represents this and represents this and represents this can actually kind of encrust over the actual experience of the very concrete experience of the color itself. And for Steiner, he proposes this radical idea that we can know everything we need to know about color just by our direct experience with it. And this includes, and then we can we'll understand why different cultures associate this color with this and this, but we do that through the color, not the other way around. You kind of remain with symbolism. This is a danger, I think, of symbolism. This means this means this means this. I put them together and it means this. I kind of stay clean and outside of the whole process rather than going through and concretely experiencing these real living forces that are, in a sense, almost dangerous. Their living quality can be more felt when we don't box them into their meanings. Jung was kind of big on this too, right? When you interpreted a dream, you can't kill it with the interpretation. Like, you don't want to kill it with the interpretation and just have this one-to-one correspondence, but allow it to have this like room to breathe and room to live.
Yeah, for me, a dream is like a tarot card. Like, you can see the colors of it, you can see the shapes in the story, but then there's also like more layers. Like, you can take this symbol on this side of the card with this one, see how they kind of like are symmetrically like touching each other. When imagine it was folded on this way, the cloudy with like this color, and the cloudy day, how it kind of, and you can go deep in these archetypes, like as you could in a dream, have all the layers open up to you.
Look, I think the singularities that give rise, or like the archetypes that give rise to all the different tarot cards in the world, all the different decks, all the different interpretations far exceed this. They're deeper, they're more ineffable than that.
Yeah, true. And that's why, like, in my personal study, I'd rather study directly like the Kabbalistic tree of life for the major arcana, because you can study the path that link the Sephara instead of the interpretation of the artist when he did the tarot card of it.
Yeah.
You can understand, like, in relationship with this, if you're this one, okay, how do they connect, and how would you actually have to what would you have to be in order to in kind of incarnate these qualities of this path?
Yeah, right. The symbol's not isolated to itself. It's also like an ecology of symbols, and the 22 arcana kind of gain meaning against each other as well. I think that's very true. And I think that's kind of what you get with these systems that can kind of house the arcana, and you get this connectedness.
Yeah. And I had a few weeks ago an episode with someone that actually I dove deep into the history of tarot and stuff. And they were saying that it's not necessarily true that that Kabbalah comes directly from the major arcana comes directly from the Kabbalah. Like, they were saying that it was anyways, one of them. I think tarot was invented way before or the opposite, but like it was not directly tied to those paths. It was an invention that they just overlapped it and were like, oh, there's 2022, and then they kind of made it work inside the system. And at the end of the day, I think, like you were mentioning, it comes down to experience. Whether if you actually try it, what experience do you get from it? Is it beneficial? Do you have insights from it or not?
Yeah, I think one of the great spiritual teachers, and it is necessarily finding your own ability, your own compass. There's all kinds of dangers with this, but the way I see it is there's no way around it, because you have hundreds, thousands of systems saying, I'm the only one. And so you need to develop an inner faculty. I find personally that there's a kind of truth in me, not my ego, because sometimes it's incompatible with my wishes. And that absolutely has to be a guiding force. Discerning this is very difficult, and you can run into all kinds of dangers because then it's just about you. So finding a balance between, these things, I think is the major task.
Yeah. It's funny because this painting is all about that. It's called The Hermit, and the hermit is this kind of this entity that connects with his or her inner guidance. His sun.
Yeah.
He has a sun in his lantern.
Yeah.
And the sun is the symbol of the heart, which connects you to your higher self, which is non-ego. So that's funny. That's right behind them.
Yeah.
It's brought back because I've painted this in 2017, but it feels like, when you do a painting, sometimes for 2 months, you're just inside this world, understand the symbolism.
Yeah.
And then you don't fully necessarily integrate all of it, and then it gets pushed back. And then you have a shirt that pops up. And it's a good reminder for me anyways to re-study this truth about what I was trying to integrate back then in 2017.
Yeah. It's interesting to see how they change as well, how it changes. I think a good piece of art continually renews itself. Again, it's inexhaustible. This is true with books, I find. There's books I've read 6 times, and every time I read it, something new emerges.
Yeah, that's the power of art, of good art. It takes you from where you are right now and gives you a feedback loop.
Yeah.
And then 2-3 years later, you come back, and then you're somewhere else, and it gives you more. It feeds you. In this way, like a mirror would. And so maybe to conclude, is there anything you wished I had asked you that didn't come through?
No, I felt like that was a pretty organic conversation that connected maybe some of the more abstract things we were talking about at first, and hopefully whoever's listening can get a sense of how that's relating to these more definitive applications of what we're talking about in the beginning, with the left and the right could perhaps be a little confusing.
And do you have any advice, or is it just something that you feel like you you've delved into and you've studied so much that some insight came that you want to end the podcast with sharing with the audience?
I think, the advice I constantly try to remind myself of is to remain open. Is to experiment. To remain open, experiment, and be wary of your certainties.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It's a good reminder in this space too, like the darkness, that because these truths often will emerge when you stop thinking, stop doing things. You just kind of rest and like take time to, study your mind. What are your beliefs, first of all? And
this is another theme that's kind of come up along the same timelines as the cylinder for me, is silence. A lot of the books I'm reading speak of silence. I'm reading St. John of the Cross, Dark Night of the Soul. I've been going to some meditation meetups and really realizing the profundity of quietness, stillness, which is, I'm naturally quite extroverted. Maybe talk too much, vocalize my ideas too much. And turning towards silence has been a big change in the past couple months.
That's beautiful. And maybe we can finish also. I think I'm going to try to publish this before December 1st, inviting people to come if you're in Montreal, Skull Center, where we're filming this in the Belgo, see the show. Now we're filming in September, but there's still like 4 months.
Yeah, 3 months, I think. Yeah.
So I think it'll be an interesting experience once everything is lit up perfectly, and to contemplate darkness, silence, but like the senses and how they inform your reality as well. So I'm just putting it out there.
A kind of fullness in darkness as well, this paradox.
So thank you so much for accepting this. It was great. And and do you want to leave people with your social media website if they want to look up your work?
Yeah, just I actually don't have a website right now, but I have, post most of my work on Instagram, which is just my name, Matt Cangiano. I also have a collective where we make a zine called Gnostic Technology, where I've published like this meditation. This is kind of my writing outlet. And then, that's pretty much it. Hopefully there'll be some of those zines available here in the future.
Cool. Well, thank you.
Thanks a lot, Alex. I think what you're doing is very important, and I appreciate it.
No, thank you. Appreciate that. Thanks for watching, guys. Hope you guys enjoyed this episode. If you liked, please go follow and subscribe on YouTube. It helps a lot to gain momentum with this project. And go check out our website if you want to also work one-on-one. I do Astro Tarot sessions to help you connect to your art, to your creation in a more subtle way, to understand what your mind is projecting in your work that you might not be conscious of. So I invite you to go check it out, and thanks for watching.